Every Sunday, my husband and I sit down for a money chat. I know that's not sexy, but it's been wildly useful.
No, I actually love that because I feel like I'm at the age where I'm like, okay, I need to stop guessing where my money's going.
Yes, and that's exactly where Pocketsmith helps. You can track what you spend and earn, categorize and label spending, set up budgets, and view your finances in a calendar and actually forecast your cash flow up to 60 years into the future. And for neurodivergent brains, that flexibility matters. Sometimes you don't need more willpower, you need a system that makes the information easier to see.
So, whatever your goals, like saving, paying things down, or just trying not to spend your whole salary on takeaway, Pocketsmith allows you to easily track and measure your money and get to enjoy the process of building toward your financial goals.
If you'd like to manage your money like a pro, Pocketsmith has a special deal for the Climb listeners. Get 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/the-climb-podcast. See our show notes for more details. We're recording this episode on the beautiful, unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We want to express our gratitude for being able to create this podcast on this land, and we pay our respects to their enduring culture and connection to country. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to The Climb, a podcast about the messy, brilliant, relentless journey of building something meaningful. As an introvert who believes in adding value, not noise, every 40-minute conversation is built to respect your time, but also actually teach you something useful.
Today, we're talking all about Hyperfocus and how it built TDP in a way, Cherie. But we're also going to touch on boredom in founders and how that can be really dangerous in the journey to creating a thriving business. So, again, I'm going to hand over to you, Cherie, to kick us off and tell us a little bit about your experience with Hyperfocus and how it got us here.
Yeah, okay, so I've loved a quote for a really long time that I actually heard at a neurodivergent conference a few years back now, where they just named the elephant in the room, which was to be neurodivergent is to be intense. And I really loved that, Steph, because it was such a true statement. Like, I do think neurodivergent folk are really intense human beings, and so part of that intensity is, our wiring for hyperfocus in general. And how that's always showed up in my life is just absolute obsession and baby Cherie days. We're talking, I'm going to say 12 years old-ish or maybe 11. I, as a kid, was obsessed with The Lion King. And so my hyperfocus was on collecting all of the Lion King cards, the whole set, and just getting so obsessed about that and wanting to, complete the collection. By the way, Steph, in case you're just dying to know, I did. So benefits of hyperfocus.
Okay, I'll backspace that question.
Thank you so much. $28 per week paper round. We love you. Yeah, now as an adult and having a business, obsession looks different, and it does show up in business. And I'm going to say it's the hyperfocus that really helped me in TDP's early years, because the truth is it's the most you'll ever work for the least you've ever earned. When I say the least you've ever earned, I didn't get a salary for the first 3 years. When I say least, I'm talking nothing. It's like growing up on a farm and walking out to see your little chickens, and they have not laid any eggs for 3 years straight, So you're going to need some kind of obsession. And thankfully for a lot of neurodivergent people, that shows up with just, that natural kind of inclination to go really hyper-focused on some, really incredible things. And so it's late nights, it's really deep immersion, like it's just absolute obsession, honestly, and really happy obsession. Like there was not one part of that where I felt honestly unwell. If anything, it just gave me energy / gave me life. One of my favorite things about that is an ability to see patterns that others can't. I think for the most part, it feels like a bit of a blessing. I think I use and exploit my own self in that sense. Like, I've just got this ability to see things that it's taken me too long to realize, I don't think other people are clocking that, but I do, and that's been really beneficial in, building out the business. And so if I was to give it a title, I think hyperfocus for me in the early years of the digital picnic felt like really becoming the engine of the business. And it was a really happy place. I bloody loved it.
Love that. And
Yeah.
for anyone who's listening that maybe hasn't experienced hyperfocus before, very different to maybe from a neurotypical perspective of just being obsessed with something for a day or something, right? Like they're very different experiences.
It's so much more intense than that. I think historically I've probably done people's heads in with hyperfocus. Like I know now looking back on my life, I've probably been a little bit annoying to some people when I'm just really hyper focused on something. And it's the only way I can describe it to neurotypical folk is like the Ice Age movie with that animal that's obsessed with the acorn
Oh,
and
yeah.
just won't give it up. The whole movie,
Oh,
you
it's
know.
killing me. I can't think of its
What is
name.
its name?
Scratchy or something?
Scratch.
No?
It's Scratch.
Is it?
I think so.
Oh.
Do we need to put a podcast disclaimer here to say there's every chance that this is not the animal's name, but I'm going to say it's Scratch.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's hyperfocus
Yeah.
in visual format, movie format. Not one point throughout that entire movie, a whole ice age, could he give up on that or she. I'm not sure if we identified a gender. They gave up on that acorn. That's hyperfocus.
That's a squirrel.
It's a squirrel, of course. Acorn.
Scrat. It's called
Scrat.
Scrat. Amazing.
Yeah.
So in its peak, in the TDP years, what did hyperfocus look like in the business?
I think what it's always going to look like for me is this seemingly this autistic spin. So spin means special interest that I have in people. I've always had it. Honestly, I am literally obsessed with human beings, no matter honestly who they are. Even the shady ones, I'm actually, the obsession goes a different way where I want to figure them out. That works really well when if you're working marketing. I've always said you're going to want to like people. You know what I mean? Like I just don't know
It's pretty
many.
important.
Yeah. I'm not sure I've met many marketers who genuinely hate people. You're going to have a really rough time in this industry if you do, by the way. So, that's a big one. It's always been leaning into this content spin as well. So again, special interest. I've always had an absolute special interest in content, and I think it pairs back with that love of storytelling. And so as I just keep moving through the industry, I just get a little bit obsessed with different ways that I can package up storytelling as the industry changes. It's in its early days, it was writing blog posts and wow, and now it's video format and so on. But it doesn't seem to matter what shifts within industry. I'll always fall back on that love, for storytelling. I think as well where my hyper focus has showed up really well within the business has been through these once per annum boot camps that we run. And I think I might irritate people because some of them are so successful that they're like, can you run it again? Or can you do the same boot camp next year? And I'm a bit of an asshole because I'm like, no, and also no. And my reasons why are I don't want to do it again. I love hyper focusing for that 6-week sprint once per year and giving that group of humans everything that I've got to help them develop in that space that I'm teaching on. And then the second thing is I need to make sure that each year the topic checks out with what they should know this year. So if I was to repeat it, truthfully, would be so much more profitable because I wouldn't have to repackage everything from scratch. But I wouldn't be happy. My hyper focus wouldn't be, satiated. And as well, I would say another area that it shows up within business is my absolute ability to hyper focus and hyper focus really well in cleanup. I love cleaning mess up at home. I am one of those annoying people who really like a clean home. I don't judge anyone for living that's how I do me, right?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
If I have a glass of water and I put that glass on the bench, would you like to see that in the sink?
Yep.
Yeah.
As long as you're hydrated enough. Yes.
Yes, in the sink. Yeah, got it.
But I'm not an asshole about it. That's the thing. Like I'll wait for you to dip and then I'll be like,
You
okay,
quietly,
this
yeah.
one goes in the dishwasher, So yeah, I'm that guy.
Yeah.
And how that translates in business is I love coming in to clean up mess. Hopefully not self-made. I don't like to just make mess to satiate the need to clean things up, but I have realized I'm really good in clean up eras for TDP, which, we're going to clock 12 years in business this year. So I've cleaned up. I've definitely cleaned up in those 12 years. Any business that's done more than 11 years will have moments where something needs to be cleaned. Examples here, something that comes straight to my mind, and we discussed it on, our first two episodes, to be really honest, in my cleanup stage. Just one small part of a cleanup was realizing when I took the role of a sort of managing director of the business again, we didn't have updated job descriptions and they also weren't super neural inclusive. And I've always said all brains benefit. So I hyper focused on those things like I've never done before. It took me 6 weeks of like straight up hyper focus. And I spoke to HR mates and they said, Cherie, this will take you so much longer than 6 weeks. And I thought, okay, thanks. I really appreciate that. But actually, no, I did complete it in 6 weeks because I just underestimated the true strength of hyperfocus. I was locked in.
Mm.
I loved it. Like I said in that episode, it actually made me fall in love with my business again, overhauling our JDs. They're actually due for another update soon. So I can't wait to hyperfocus on that, you know. And then another sort of moment that I can remember is, you know, we once upon a time made a particular hire who took a parental leave contract, but they just honestly, they weren't right for that particular role. Great human, just not right for that particular role. So they came in to the role. It was a really senior position, and it was their understanding that senior leadership would be to delegate as much of their role as humanly possible. And that's honestly probably, I guess, what works in much bigger corporations, which would have been where they'd hailed from. However, indie agency, no, you're gonna piss some people off if you roll in at the most kind of senior level and say, I'm not gonna do kind of any of this. And so we had a really constructive conversation and both agreed this might not be the environment for them. And we also only really had 9 months left of that parental leave contract by the time we figured it out. Actually, it might have even been less. So there was no point re-recruiting. I just had to lock in alongside Savannah, who was in our business at the time. And we locked in together. And I would say Hyperfocus really helped in that, you know, era as well.
You've told me that hyperfocus is like a pendulum, like it
Mm.
swings between hyperfocus and boredom. So, did you want to touch on that other side?
Can definitely touch on this because I've got the lived experience of this. And I think for any especially neurodivergent folk who are listening in, there's some genuine statistics going around about neurodivergent folk and especially autistic folk who could be unemployed or even worse for me personally, underemployed. And what that means is underutilized, you know. So if I'm not utilized in a way that I feel like I should be, I will get bored really quickly and it's a danger spot. So I need to feel not just utilized, but utilized really well. And I get a bit of a high, you know, from it. So at this stage of the digital picnic, I've noticed that, you know, I don't want to be at all a bottleneck to anyone on the team and so therefore TDP's growth. But I have noticed there are particular moments where I'm genuinely needed and it's not through the team, probably not, you know, that they've tried everything in the lead up to and then they're like, oh, Cherie, we're going to need you for brainstorming on this particular decision or looping into this particular escalation and so on. And I've noticed, I was of genuine benefit here. I just love those moments. Like it's the antidote to boredom. It actually lights me up, you know, to be of genuine use and whatever the opposite of underutilization is. Like I don't want to be overutilized. I don't want to take advantage of my own like hyper focus and pattern recognition and solutions orientation and so on. But it does light me up to feel like I'm adding value. Touching on that underutilization piece, I can remember once upon a time many years ago where my role probably had some overlap with another role here and I wanted to be so respectful and the same goes for them. Like they wanted to be really respectful as well. And so we decided to kind of lock in and, you know, create a spreadsheet and just color code who would be on what so that we're not pissing each other off because that's the last thing I ever want to do, you know, to a person. But I guess they didn't want to do that to me as well. And so we created the spreadsheet, color coded it, wrote down kind of everything within each other's roles, figured out where there was an overlap, and then decided, well, where does everything fall? For that person, employee side, they really want to impress a founder, right? Like, and so they took the bulk of everything. And I remember when we got into the meeting and I looked at the spreadsheet, I was like, oh, okay, I don't just my, I was like, oh, it felt like the chicken with the eggs again. I'm like,
You're like,
maybe half an egg.
I don't even need to come in.
Should I sign up for Centrelink, or like I'm just not really sure what you would like me to do. And there were just only really two things, which was stay on TDP's content and manage TDP's online community. I was a community manager. And that was my first role in this
Yeah.
industry, like kind of 17 years ago. So I was just like, ooh, that's some underutilization. And I knew I was going to get bored. Kind of regret not figuring that out sooner. I was just doing this uncomfortable dance where I didn't want to look like the bottleneck. I didn't want to be that founder. I wanted to really respect, how that kind of list panned out on the spreadsheet. But at the same time, I got so bored, and we'll touch on, this later, but you never want a bored founder in the business. And then let's not go founder side on this as well, because I also want to talk about, even these days, moments where I see potential boredom creeping in for some of our absolute A players. They're going to need a project to work on. They're going to hate feeling underutilized. And so, even one example, and I love this person for it, but they've very explicitly said, look, I don't have an interest in progressing to the point where I have direct reports. And, for a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn, you always think that advancement has to have everything with ultimately building out direct reports. That's not always the growth trajectory, but it can be in an agency structure. I will say that. So I remember feeling like, oh, I'm slightly concerned, because I'm just wondering what growth can I create for them that our agency can facilitate. I also know they're a genius, and so I thought, okay, if you don't want direct reports, build out an AI agent, or AI agents plural. In fact, build a department of them. And I love the idea of having a team of AI agents reporting through to this person. And thankfully, so do they,
Yeah.
so that's going to probably be their growth journey here at the Digital Picnic, and it's going to be a really impressive one. So you want to make sure that, and I know with that person, they really benefit from, they've got a desire, a natural lean towards hyperfocus. So I just know they're going to have a freaking field day with that particular phase of their career journey. Yep.
I love that. So, what does the boredom truly feel like? Obviously, you've built something so successful, and ideally, you're excited about that, most days, or aiming for every day, but realistically, most days. But yeah, what does it feel like when it's just not clicking?
Yeah, I think I really thought about this, and I thought, what is the feeling? And for me, I landed on, like, I built this, but I'm not excited by it anymore. That's a shit spot to be in. So going back to that spreadsheet, when I realized I was just on TDP's content plus community management, I thought I'm going to get bored, because we work together on content. You and I both move pretty fast. We would both have time outside of that to work on other pieces. I mean, for you've brought a whole podcast to life, so outside of content,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So we don't want to underutilize clever women, right? So yeah, it's like I built this, but I'm no longer excited by it. It's that loss of stimulation. For me, it can end up feeling really like I'm disconnected from my own company. I don't like that feeling. And for some founders, there's an ensuing identity crisis, So some people will ask themselves, well, if I'm not in the weeds anymore, who the flip am I? And you've just got to let go of feeling like you have to be the best at literally everything. And for me, the biggest transformation was moving from being the doer to being the leader. Yeah.
Have you ever felt like you were outgrowing TDP?
Yes, coming up to 12 years in business this year. And so I just don't think you can spend that long on the same thing, especially as a neurodivergent woman who's dopamine deficient, and always looking for the next kind of hit of dopamine. And so, I've had a lot of moments where I feel like, oh my gosh, is this it? Like, is this the moment I might outgrow my own business? And I never want that, because I really love this business. You pour so much in, and so it can feel really disorientating when you have this niggling feeling like, is this what it feels like, that the point of outgrowing a business? One day you just kind of realize this doesn't stimulate me the same way that it used to. What I landed on is realizing when I'm feeling that, I actually haven't outgrown my business. I've just outgrown that particular role within the business. So I had to learn a really important lesson around telling myself, hey, girl, you're an employee too, you know? And I really thought about that a lot and thought about what what happens employee side. Well, you get regular one-to-ones, you get feedback from like a leader, like a manager, a mentor, a coach, a guide. You create growth plans for yourself with those people within those one-to-ones. You know, what else? You have a yearly review, bare minimum, right? You have job description updates. There's even potential for promotion. Like the list goes on. But when you're the founder, I have to say, I don't have one-to-ones, none. And the only feedback is it's complaints. That's the only feedback I
It's
get,
not
you
the
know?
good
It's
kind.
not the good kind. And that's okay. Like all of that's growth, but you know, there's none of that for me. I don't even update my JD, to be so honest with you,
Mm.
but well, I didn't, but I do now. And so, you know, that was the biggest shift for me, is realizing if I've got this niggling feeling, it might just mean that after 2 years, lo and behold, I'm probably due a promotion.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've sort of, or at least a JD update. What do I need to shift up in this JD to make sure I'm still in love with this role? Because just like an employee, if you're feeling that niggling feeling, I would never want anyone on my team to stick around in that boredom slash it will turn into resentment. It really will. And so, you know, Steph, like we're like, hey, what can we do? Like if you're hitting a ceiling here, what does it look like out there, and how can we help you get there, you know, and so
Mm.
on. So what I've really learned is it's the discomfort itself, that's not the red flag, it's actually a growth signal. So I usually pat myself on the back. I don't get the pay rise, but what I do instead is have like a quiet promotion where I'm like, I get to focus on this now, you know, and so I just update that JD. Look, at one point, I'm sure I'll get a pay rise too. I should work on that, right? But yeah, I'm usually just pretty excited by the discomfort now. I'm clear on that, meaning you're due for a JD kind of upgrade, shift up the KPIs, even like whatever it has to be, but check in with yourself. If you're not doing the fortnightly one-to-ones, you can at least have one per year, right? So
Yeah, I
yeah,
feel like a lot of small business owners would be hearing that right now and like loving that idea of giving their own JD a bit of an audit once a year, if
100%.
not more, and
Yes.
like falling back in love with their business and their role. So important.
I think so too. I think there might even be a lot of business owners listening who probably haven't even created a JD for themselves. So
Yeah.
do it now.
Yeah.
If you're driving, pull over.
Yeah.
But seriously, write that down and just say, it's probably time to write a job description for myself and set some KPIs and get excited again about outgrowing this JD and moving into the next one and so on.
So, what do you think people and probably even business owners misunderstand about that phase of founderhood?
I think ego always gets in the way. Like everything in life, when you figure it all out, right? Like, not that I have, but I've just realized that ego seriously gets in the way of so
Yeah.
much. It really does. And so I think a lot of people, when it comes to this particular misunderstanding, they consider that boredom equals failure. You know, that's just ego in the way. And so I say boredom is the opposite of failure. It actually means that you've mastered something. And so, Steph, you'll know this as well. Here at the Digital Picnic, we run, everyone would know them as yearly reviews, but internally we call them IDPs, which means individual development plan. In those plans, we give ratings, which sounds so clinical. And I know every workplace does this. It's so HRsy, right? But those ratings start at 1 and move through to 5. 5 equals mastery. It takes a lot to seriously master something. Like we kind of normalize leading up to the reviews, hey, don't downgrade yourself, but also be aware that mastery is like, that's a big deal. For someone to score all 5s, I would be saying to them, you will want to advance from this role, whether it's internally here if the opportunity is available or honestly elsewhere, because staying in mastery for too long, that's when the boredom kicks in, you know? So think about that for yourself if you're listening. Like if it's not failure, is it? Boredom isn't failure. It means you've mastered something. And so you've got to do something with that awareness. I think also though, boredom can definitely be mislabeled as burnout. I've always found when I really get honest with myself, burnout needs rest, whereas boredom needs reinvention, and they are two really different things.
All right. So, how does autistic hyperfocus show up in business? And it's kind of like a real advantage by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it can be an advantage. I love though this viral meme that circulates online in like neurodivergent land where some people sort of jokingly say, if you can't handle me at my executive dysfunction, you don't deserve my hyperfocus, which I always get a giggle over because that feels, really real and relatable. Steph, we were having like plane chats recently. I think it was on the plane. Gosh, we've done so much together in the last
I
month. I don't know
know.
where the setting was, but I think I was telling you something like my husband, Dave, flicked something across to me and I was just like, timing, Dave, like I've got so much going on and why did you flick this thing to me? And I think it was because he just knows that I've got this kind of competitive advantage, hyper-focusy thing and he just thought she can handle this. But I was like, actually, I can't. I've got too much on my plate. So yeah, it's an advantage, but it can also be a disadvantage as well. Sometimes people can look at hyper-focus and mistake that for you just nailing every aspect of your life when there's a lot going on internally where you're like, hell. But for me, honestly, autistic hyperfocus is this ability to go, I've always described it the same way. I go incredibly deep. I'm incredibly fast and I actually stay there longer than most people would be able to. So that's the difference, I would say, when you asked earlier on, like, what's the difference when someone's hanging out with an obsession for, say, a couple of days, or I would say incredibly deep, incredibly fast, and they stay there so much longer than most people would. So obviously in business, that is an unbelievable competitive advantage. For the Digital Picnic, we've been open for 11 plus years and 50% of that time has been in and out of various crises. I can stick around. I can definitely stick around and that is a competitive advantage. You need obsession. I benefit from pattern recognition. And I'm also someone who can sit with a problem until they crack it. That's what I love most about me, actually. So, hyper focus, if you need to understand sort of the difference, it definitely doesn't skim. It instead solves, So, for me, it's pattern recognition at speed. And when you're in that deep hyper focus state, patterns stop feeling hidden. And again, going back to what I said earlier, I just love this about myself so much where I can get pulled into sometimes, honestly, meetings that can feel confronting to others, but it feels so easy for me, to be honest, because I just have locked in on calm, regulated energy as my leadership is really evolving. And so I'm not honestly really distressed in some crises. I say this in inverted commas, but also I can figure things out really quickly and just kind of know how to let it all play out. And that feels like a real competitive advantage.
And then on the flip side of that, what happens when that hyperfocus has nowhere to go?
Yeah, always makes me sad to hear that, right? Like you don't want hyper focus with nowhere to go. I've actually been really lucky, to be so honest with you, because quite literally, almost by definition, what I do in this industry, in my job here, it's attached to two of my lifelong spins. So it was that special interest in people and special interest in storytelling. So I'm lucky. I'm one of the really lucky ones. I feel sorry for the folk whose hyperfocus leaves them feeling like they've got nowhere to go with that. But I would say I'm definitely one of the luckier founders where boredom for me has only ever meant like mastery. And luckily, even in some of those things that I do feel like I master, it's still attached to a spin. So, I'm a lucky gal. I would say you have to keep evolving though. Otherwise, that boredom could be really dangerous for your business. So, I've actually noticed that in many of the founders that TDP's worked across, 11 plus years of business now. I don't like seeing it, to be honest, Steph. It actually makes me really uncomfortable. And I know a lot of agency owners talk about probably some of the clients that they avoid working with. And it might be, the obvious agency red flags. I hate using even the word red flag, by the way. It's a really sucky word. But the obvious things would be, say, a prospective client coming across to you and saying, you're our last hope, or like just the obvious, right? But not a lot of agency founders touch on this one. And I'm going to tell you, I don't like to work with a board founder.
Yeah.
It is absolute guaranteed chaos. And so a bored founder who stays bored is some of the most dangerous client relationships that you can honestly clock. I really can't stand it. It's because of this, I think that bored founder dips into some of the most dangerous things I've seen play out as an agency owner and in my agency owning life. One of the most dangerous ones is the level of self-sabotage that gets attached to, the board founder. So what that can look like and has looked like for TDP, because we've worked with a few board founders in 11 years of business, they pick unnecessary fights. They over-involve themselves. They start unnecessary projects and it just really starts to feel like freaking whiplash, It actually strategically, sorry to swear, but it strategically fucks the business, It really does. And we're strategists and creatives, and I'm just thinking, ah.
Yeah.
They disrupt their own team internally, but they also do the same to the external team, which is us, the agency. And then the worst part is those two teams do not get along when nothing could matter more. You've got to get along. If you want results from your agency, you need to have a really good working relationship, a respectful working relationship, and a high trust working relationship. And a board founder can honestly sabotage, all of that. The other thing we've noticed is they create fake urgency and really unnecessary chaos. They chase new ideas for dopamine because they're bored. They're wanting to kind of burn it down and start again, So the main thing is a board founder doesn't sit still and they absolutely destabilize things. And that has been, I think we've had this come up for us in 11 years. I would say we've had this scenario play out about 5 times. And every single time, Steph, it plays out the same way. And sometimes I don't even think the founder realizes A, that they're bored, and B, how much self-sabotage follows that boredom. Yeah.
It reminds me of like people when they're in a bad relationship and you're watching it and you're like, get out of there. You clearly don't want to be there.
So
You're
true.
you're just hurting yourself. You're hurting the other person. Like it's just a train wreck.
Absolutely true. I remember dating a guy that he wasn't right for me. And the worst part is he was just the loveliest guy. I ended up just picking fights to try and, it's the same. That's a good shout actually.
Literally
Good
like
comparison.
some excitement, but it's actually like, no, this is awful. Like you need to get out of here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So true.
I feel like we need to do a dating episode at some stage, maybe season 2, Sheree.
That would be fun.
Yeah, I'd love to know your dating stories. All right, back to this. We'll save that for season 2. Have you ever found yourself disrupting things when they weren't actually broken?
Yeah, I think for me, the dead giveaway is exactly that, like feeling like I need to fix something that actually isn't broken. Even bringing it back to that job description example I gave before, if I find myself just a smidge bored, I could probably think, oh, I should overhaul all of the JDs, but it's like, Sheree, it hasn't even been a year since you did this last. That's a bloody big project. And you're just essentially fixing something that actually isn't broken. So now I just kind of calm my farm and respect that project for how big it really is and try to not buy into the fake urgency of someone saying, oh, there's one thing in my JD that doesn't reflect what I do in my day-to-day. And I'm like, yeah, but that's all Australian workplaces, to be so honest. I really think for me, the dead giveaway is when I'm starting to fix things that aren't really broken. You're then essentially not really solving a business problem, to be honest. You're just solving your own boredom. And if you don't channel that energy properly as a founder, it will actually leak into the places it doesn't really belong.
So if a neurodivergent leader is listening to this or founder and thinking, oh gosh, I'm feeling that boredom at the minute, how do they know if it's boredom or if they're actually outgrowing their business?
Yeah. I've got a whole list on this because I have lived it, not actually so much myself, but lived the experience of having partnered with board founders at an agency level. And I've actually got a list here, Steph, if you want me to read off it.
Please, yeah.
Because I just want people who are listening to maybe sort of have those, maybe for some of you, it's like little heart pounding moments where you're like, oh, this is me.
Yeah. Yep.
If I were to break it up, hopefully really well, boredom is about stimulation. Outgrowing is actually about misalignment, so boredom kind of tends to come and go, whereas outgrowing really sticks. Boredom can be solved with rest. Outgrowing needs reinvention. Boredom wants novelty. Outgrowing needs evolution. Boredom is restless. Outgrowing is confronting. Boredom leads to distraction, which is shite for a business. Outgrowing leads to reflection. But I think a big one for me has been, if the discomfort actually follows you even on your best days, like your best days at work, that feeling is still following me. There's a misalignment. I'm in the latter rather than the former,
Yeah.
So I think to anyone listening, I would really implore you, don't rush to fix the feeling, just actually sit with it long enough to really understand it. And especially for the neurodivergent founders, I would say Hyperfocus gives you such a strong sense of identity when you're in it. So just call it exactly what it is. Like, it's a competitive advantage. But when that fades, you can actually feel like you've lost your edge. And it's a really unsettling feeling for me. I don't like to feel like I've lost that feeling. I don't know if you're on the recent TikTok FYP, but there's this trend going at the time that we're recording where it's like, I've got the magic in me, and I feel like I would love to dip into that trend somehow to showcase Hyperfocus. But when you lose that, you do really feel like the magic in you is kind of fading out and you're losing your edge, and it's not a good feeling. So you haven't actually done any of that. You've just outgrown where you're placing it.
I love that. That's such a good checklist. And I'm glad that you haven't outgrown TDP.
You're still stuck with me, Steph.
Yeah, still gotcha. But yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed that episode. If you want to support us, you can subscribe and download the future eps. We will have another one coming for you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Climb with Cherie Clonan and Steph Clifford. Here's to growth, grit, and bloody good stories. Every Sunday, my husband and I sit down for a money chat. I know that's not sexy, but it's been wildly useful.
No, I actually love that because I feel like I'm at the age where I'm like, okay, I need to stop guessing where my money's going.
Yes, and that's exactly where Pocketsmith helps. You can track what you spend and earn, categorize and label spending, set up budgets, and view your finances in a calendar and actually forecast your cash flow up to 60 years into the future. And for neurodivergent brains, that flexibility matters. Sometimes you don't need more willpower. You need a system that makes the information easier to see.
So, whatever your goals, like saving, paying things down, or just trying not to spend your whole salary on takeaway, Pocketsmith allows you to easily track and measure your money and get to enjoy the process of building toward your financial goals.
If you'd like to manage your money like a pro, Pocketsmith has a special deal for the Climb listeners. Get 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/the-climb-podcast. See our show notes for more details.